Well, a legal setback for Maine Governor Paul LePage, as a judge in that state ruled yesterday that nurse Casey Hickox could not be quarantined against her will because she's not showing any symptoms of Ebola. So what does this mean for other states seeking to impose their own rules to protect the public health? Let's bring in our legal panel now. Bob Massey, Fox News legal analyst, and Rachel Self, a trial attorney. All right, if the mandated 21-day quarantine, Bob, had been in effect when Dr. Craig Spencer returned to New York City after caring for patients in West Africa with Ebola, he wouldn't have possibly exposed others to the disease after he tested positive. Okay, so there is a negative story, an example of why perhaps nurse Casey Hickox tested negative for Ebola after returning from Sierra Leone, but she was put in isolation anyway. Was that move unjust?
Well, I think it's an emotional reaction, Julie, that all of us are concerned about. There's high anxiety for the concern of the spread of this disease. So this is a situation where anxiety and fear intersected with the law. And there's certain civil liberties that we all have. And by just reacting emotionally without symptoms and some type of objective evidence, then basically she's going to be protected by the law simply because of the fact that you have to have some type of rational basis, something that gives them the right to enforce for the safety of other individuals.
But if she is in direct contact treating Ebola patients, is that not objective evidence, Rachel? As you know, the 21-day quarantine is a state-by-state law. Do you believe that it's violating one's civil rights, constitutional rights, if it means ensuring safety to the public?
I believe that the people who are in place to judge safety of the public are scientists and doctors. And I think that here, in this particular instance, the Maine judge got this right because she wasn't exhibiting any symptoms. If we were going to accuse somebody of a crime, we would need to have some rational basis in fact before we put them in a cage, right? Some sort of probable cause to do that. Here she was exhibiting no symptoms. Several days later, she was exhibiting no symptoms. And she lives in an incredibly rural area that really the only danger was caused by people exposing themselves to her, trying to check out what she's doing when she lives in this rural area where she wasn't even going to risk possibly running into anybody. So I think that in this particular instance, and I think it needs a case-by-case evaluation because this is a very scary thing, but we need to trust the doctors and the scientists who say being in contact with someone isn't enough. You need to be exhibiting symptoms, be exposed to those things, and we can't be having knee-jerk reactions and throwing civil liberties out the window.
Sure, but Dr. Spencer didn't exhibit any kind of symptoms for at least 7 days before he came back from West Africa, and he in fact tested positive. So we can't just assume that because they haven't exhibited any symptoms that they are not eventually going to in that 21-day cycle. And then I understand about, allowing it up to them to self-quarantine. However, that did not work with Dr. Spencer, so we can't necessarily 100% trust these medical professionals to do the right thing. Can we, Bob?
Well, Julie, look, everything you just said is absolutely correct, and I think this is the tough part. This is the part of where, again, the intersection of safety and health and concern, it basically intersects with the law and how you balance this out. And it isn't easy. It isn't easy for the reasons that you just basically articulated. This is something that concerns me. I think if this would have been handled differently from the beginning by not putting her basically in a parking lot in a tent with a porta potty, maybe she could have ended up being sort of the poster child as a healthcare provider herself, saying, hey, wait a second, even though I know I don't have the symptoms, as a healthcare provider, we need to be concerned. And she could have been that poster child if she would have been treated more in a civil fashion, and that's why this thing sort of unrolled. You know what I'm saying? In the state of New Jersey, yes, absolutely.
Rachel, what if Hickox, let's say, hypothetically develops Ebola symptoms before the 21-day inoculation period and she exposes someone in the public? Then can that person turn around and sue the state? Does someone become liable? What happens then? It becomes a legal nightmare, doesn't it?
Well, I think it does and it doesn't, because ultimately speaking, you need to take everything once it is actually occurring. We have no basis to be making snap judgments here and to be leaping to conclusions. And again, we have as a country always been balancing civil liberties with public safety. And I think that we just need to be really careful in such a serious thing with such a serious disease to not be politicizing it and to have it be something that is based on science and with fact. And yes, obviously anyone can sue anyone. I mean, McDonald's gets sued for having a hot coffee spilled on when it says caution contents hot. But again, ultimately the legal system is going to make the right choices based on fact and based on evidence.
All right, Rachel Self, Bob Massey, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you for having me.
Kelly.